back. We're now on part 2 of this Telecaster guitar build series. Now if you missed the first episode, go back and check it, and I explained it in a little bit more detail. This is for a class I'm teaching at a local luthier school. And part 2 is going to take us from where we left off in part 1. That's pretty obvious, is it not? We basically had four-squared this board, and then we routed all of the truss rod and carbon fiber rod slots in there, and before we left in the last episode, I was epoxying in those carbon fiber rods. Now that's all cured and it's all set and ready to go. And there's a lot of different ways that we can approach this from, but in this particular build, I'm going to switch gears right here. I'm going to switch from getting the neck finalized to working on the fretboard, because I think that's my next logical step, to get that so it's ready to kind of place right on there. Once I get that set up, then it'll be easy to continue creating the slope in the headstock area and get everything to fit together just nice. So that's what we're going to work on today. So let's get right into it, eh? Here's what I've got, and we've talked about this before, but I've got an Indian rosewood fretboard that I'm going to be using on this guitar neck for this Telecaster build. And why are we using that? Because I can. All right? I can pick whatever I want when I'm building these things, and on this particular one I want a plain maple and Indian rosewood, and that's the way this neck's going to be. And I did, as I pointed out in the previous video, I'm using a slotted truss rod on this one. Not one that I would normally use, a little bit more on the vintage side, but I wanted to demonstrate for my students exactly how that one works. And in class I'm demonstrating a different type, one that will access through the headstock area, to give them a little bit more diversity in how and different types of truss rods that could be used. So that's what I'm doing. In getting to the fretboard, there's a lot of different ways to approach this. Typically, what I would do is take one of these sides and make sure it's perfectly flat. Okay, flatten it. Now, normally, I would take that and then square up one edge of this board, so that when I take my fret slotting template, I can basically line those up edge to edge, and when that goes on my fret slot cutting saw over here, then I've got the back sliding table fence system to support, and everything is square. However, I'm always looking for ways to improve things. And and I think I came across one that's pretty sweet. You're going to think I'm either a genius or I'm just an idiot. But it doesn't really matter, because this is going to work. And I want to give you a close-up view of this. I really wanted to create something that simplified the process of cutting the fretboard slots, the fretboard shape, and getting that to perfectly seat and match onto the neck blank itself. And so what I did is I combined two different things, two that would have been separate steps. Normally, I would take this fretboard and I would draw the center line all the way down that fretboard. I would take a template like this, and this is generally after I cut my slots, and I would line that template directly on the center line, and then I would drill, in this case, 1/8 inch holes directly into 4 locations on the back of the fretboard, and that creates an alignment. That same alignment jig, if you were to call it, template, is used then on the neck blank, and therefore the two alignments mate with each other, and it is perfectly placed every single time. The problem is getting this template on the exact spot is where I just cut the fret slots. Because obviously, if I cut the fret slots with a fret slot cutting saw with a template like this, I will have all of the frets on this side perfectly spaced for my 25.5 inch scale. However, once I take that off and I put this on there, how do I align it to the fret slots? I could draw lines from the little edges of the fret slot I see and square it up and draw it across and try to match them up the best I can, but it's a swag. All right, that's always been my problem with this technique, is I don't like swagging. I like giving swag away sometimes. But I like precision and repeatability, so I was trying to figure out a new way to do it, so I think I came up with the answer. I took the template of the fret slot cutting apparatus, and I combined it with the lines from that jig and my alignment points in those 4 different places. Now, what I can do with no center line whatsoever drawn on this fretboard, I can take some double stick tape and I can just align it so that the outline of the fretboard fits somewhere on this template. It doesn't even have to be square. I could have it positioned like this. And as long as the shape of my fretboard for this particular guitar is seen over top of the wood, it's going to fit. All right, and so when would I use that? Well, maybe my grain isn't perfectly straight as I want to be, and so it kind of curves off at the end. I can kind of impose my will, as it were, and straighten it out a little bit. Now, this particular one curves out both ends, so I don't think I'm going to worry so much about it here, but the point is, it doesn't matter. I don't need a center line anymore. Now, when I drill my holes for my alignment pins, that determines the center line, which then will match up with the center line on the guitar neck itself, and when I flush cut this out, it will be perfect every single time. All right, so now, since I don't have to worry about squaring this board or creating a center line, I can now just take my template right on there. First thing I'm going to do, though, good practice, anytime you're going to be using tape, double stick in this case, to the fretboard, it's always a good idea just to clean that oily wood just a little tiny bit. And a little bit of acetone goes a long way, am I right? So I'll just clean that mating surface ever so slightly. This, I don't want to use too much acetone on this, it'll melt the plastic, but I'll just do a quick wipe just to get any dust off of there, and then that'll be fine. In fact, I want to leave it upside down so I don't put it on top of more dust. How's that sound? The other beautiful thing about using this technique is I don't need a whole lot of tape. All I need is 2 relatively small squares that's just enough to hold that acrylic in place while I drill my alignment pin holes. All right, that's all I need it for. Once my alignment pin holes are in there, it's not moving, okay? It's not shifting. It's not kind of squirming a little bit, as sometimes double stick tape will have a little side-to-side flexibility. This will not. All right, now that I've got that tape on there, again, I'm going to take my jig, my template here, and I'm going to line it up anywhere that I can see the entire fretboard. And I would take grain and maybe better looking grain. This side seems to have more sloping grain than this side. So what I'm going to do is line up my fretboard so it uses as much of the close end to you, so my far end, as much of that as possible. And I think that will give me a better looking piece of wood. It just so happens it's pretty square with this bottom edge, but that doesn't matter. So I'm gonna press that down and get that holding just enough where I can take my 1/8 inch drill bit, and with my handy little piece of masking tape on there to set approximately 3 millimeters below the height of the template. So that's less than half of the thickness of my fretboard. And just in case you hadn't noticed, but the alignment pins are strategically placed where they go in between the frets. So it's not going to be in line with any of the fret wire. So that's why we're pretty good on that. So now we're going to just drill 4 holes. Really, 2 to 3 millimeters is all that you need. You just need enough to kind of grab it. And I've got my 1/8 inch dowel rod here, and now that I've got the hole set, I'll just insert those right in and then just cut it off flush. All right, now if there were going to be any twisting side to side, that's going to take care of that. All right, those pins are now located and they're holding it in place. But we take it to the saw, and it's going to be mostly a linear motion with downward pressure. So again, we do not need a whole lot of tape in this process. One thing I hadn't pointed out is I made this fret slot cutting template specifically for the Fender style nut. So I've got double lines here on the etching, basically on my template, but that resembles this first notch out. And I've got a pin that is a locator pin, and all of these notches, that pin is going to be shoved to the right side of the template notch, except for the nut line. And that one I will get the right and the left. And when I'm done with that, I will have just over 1/8 of an inch. I like it slightly fat. It's like 9/64 of an inch for my nut will be that dimensions. Now I'll also make multiple passes within that range so I can clean it out and not have to take a chisel to it. So once I have that nut slot area cut, then each of the fret slots, the template, the pin will be to the right side of the notch within that template, and I'll have all of the correct spacing for this 25.5 inch scale. Now this has 22 notches in it, plus the nut, I suppose, that makes 23. On this particular video series where I'm building a Telecaster, I'm going to do kind of a flush cut heel that only has 21 frets. So I do not want to go in that last notch, and that is a common mistake where you forget and you do the 22nd, and now it's cut a little bit short of actually the heel, and that's not pretty. So what I'm going to simply do is take a piece of tape, and I'm going to cover up that 22nd fret notch, and hopefully that orange piece of tape staring right at me in the face will help me not to forget, do not cut number 22, okay? Just a technique. If you're not familiar with this saw, I did an entire video episode in my Tools and Jigs series. You'll find it in that playlist. And this is made by a guy named Jim Byrnes out of the Orlando, Florida area. And the quick story, you can watch the whole video, but the quick story is he was a model maker that couldn't find tools that accurate enough, so he decided to start building his own tools. And now not only model makers buy them, but a lot of luthieres buy them. This is my dedicated fret slot cutting saw. I can use it for other things, but I do have a 25 thousandths inch blade installed on it right now, which is perfect for my fret slots. And I did have Jim install for me a locator pin into the back rail of his sliding table component. So now that pin combined with the notches in my template will allow me to get that perfect placement all the way down. So we just completed the nut slot of the Fender style fretboard, and I did what I said I was going to do. I used the locator pin against both the left and the right side of the notch labeled N for nut, and that gave me this slot. And I said I was shooting for 9/64. This nut is right on 9/64, and if you look, it'll drop in and it'll slide a little ways and it gets stuck. So that slot is a hair under 9/64, which is really actually right where I want it to be. It'll take a few swipes of sandpaper to get this perfectly sized in the thickness dimension, and that will fit perfectly the nut slot that I just created for this fretboard. So now let's go ahead, speed up the process, and make all of the individual fret slots at this point. All right, now that we're done cutting all the slots, and that only took about 20 seconds when we speeded up, so it really saved a lot of time there. Let's go ahead and take this off. So I'm just going to peel that board off of this tape, and again, there were only a couple pieces holding it on, so not that bad, because it was those pins that were holding it in place. And the cool thing about this, I have no marks on the back side of this whatsoever. You see all my slots on this side? Where am I going to put my template? This is where these really come in. Now I can slide, see if I can do this actually. Now I can slide those pins, and I will put some double stick under this also, just to kind of keep it nice and snug. But as you can see, from that view, that is the portion of the fretboard that I wanted to keep. This is the part with more of the curved grain that I wanted to get rid of. That will be cut off, but still the alignment is dead perfect with what you see on this side without any guesswork whatsoever. So you want precision in your template system? Maybe figure out a new template system, one that incorporates locator pins right in the fret slot cutting template, and that way it'll be lined up perfectly throughout the entire process. So I took the fretboard template itself, the separate one, the one that's not built into here, and I lined that perfectly on my neck blank, and I did the exact same thing as here. So I drilled my alignment pin holes so that it was perfectly centered and perfectly positioned on my estimated nut line. All right, so then I pull off this template, and I've got a few of these locator pins in here, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to pull these out. Now these pins are going to be too tall for that, so I'll just chop them down a little bit. And about the only thing that I will do is just chamfer the top corner just a little tiny bit. All right, now the fretboard is pressed on there, not sized yet, but you can see those pins is holding it into perfect alignment. So when I glue this fretboard on, that fretboard cannot shift like glue is a slippery surface that will allow it to shift, but not with the pins in there. So the fretboard will eventually be cut out to the template shape, and then it'll be slipped on here, and then the whole thing will be cut out, but the alignment is dead perfect at this point in time. So that is the beautiful thing about what we've just done here. So up till this point, we do not have this glued on. We do not have the truss rod inserted yet, because we don't want to do that. The next step will be to shape the headstock. That will be in the next episode. And then in some of your cases for your guitars where you have the access point for the truss rod adjustment in the headstock, then we're going to have to show you how to drill that hole. In this case, I've already got the hole on the slotted tail end. That's just going to slide right in there, perfectly fine. But we are still going to hold off until we get this completely shaped. I will hold this fretboard in place with the pins and shape that entire part together. I will then pull it off. I will then shape the neck, and then I will insert this and I will glue it on. So those are the next steps. But right now, all we really needed to see was the fret slot cutting techniques and how we're utilizing the template system with the locator pin bushing, drill bushings inserted in that, and how the alignment is just going to be pretty simple and hopefully foolproof for the students in my class. And for everyone else out there in the world who's kind of checking this out, not a hard thing to do to kind of figure out where your neck is going to lie on that template, and do the CAD yourself if you have that capability, and have somebody cut that template out if you don't have a laser cutter, and you can have the same basic alignment system. Let me know what you think of that. I think it's a pretty cool idea. I think it's going to be very effective for my students. And in fact, I'm going to change all my template-based systems to utilize that same technique here forward. So I think it's awesome. So that's it for today. Next episode, stay tuned for that. Hit the subscribe, hit the little bell icon for reminders when I post something new. But remember, until that next episode, no matter what you do, start with excellence.